Man of Steel rebooted the Superman film franchise with a bold new vision by director Zack Snyder. It retells Superman's origin with a modern, realistic approach, departing from the lighter tone of earlier films. In this essay, we explore the film's development and production history, the casting challenges, influences from previous Superman stories, audience and critical reception, and Snyder's creative vision for a 21st century audience. Rebooting Superman's story. Development for Man of Steel began in the late 2000s, when Warner Bros. Decided to reboot the Superman franchise after the lukewarm performance of Superman Returns. The studio solicited pitches from notable comic book writers and filmmakers to successfully relaunch Superman for modern audiences. Creators like Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Jeff Johns, and Mark Miller proposed ideas from a Donner-style epic trilogy to stories inspired by All-Star Superman and Superman, Birthright. By 2009, Warner Bros. Was convinced a fresh start was needed. A planned sequel to Superman Returns, once subtitled Man of Steel under director Bryan Singer, was scrapped in favor of a true reboot, as Warner executive Jeff Robinoff admitted Superman Returns didn't work as a film and failed to reposition the character for a new generation. A court ruling in 2009 added pressure. The heirs of Superman's creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, reclaimed rights to Superman's origin, and a judge ruled that if Warner Bros. Did not begin production on a new Superman film by 2011, the Siegel estate could sue for lost revenue. This looming deadline accelerated development. During story discussions for The Dark Knight Rises in 2008, screenwriter David S. Goyer pitched producer Christopher Nolan an idea for Superman in a modern context. Nolan was excited by this grounded reinvention, unlike any previous Superman film. Impressed, Nolan brought Goyer's concept to Warner Bros., which approved the direction and hired Nolan as a producer and Goyer as the screenwriter, leveraging their success with the Dark Knight franchise. Nolan made clear this reboot would not connect to earlier Superman films and would follow its own logic. The mandate was to tell an original story from scratch, unfettered by the Christopher Reeve Donner continuity. Warner Bros. Saw Man of Steel as a pivotal project for a larger DC Comics shared universe. Several high-profile filmmakers were approached or considered. Guillermo del Toro declined due to other commitments, and Robert Zemeckis was also courted. The studio's shortlist included Ben Affleck, Darren Aronofsky, Duncan Jones, Jonathan Liebesman, Matt Reeves, and Tony Scott. Ultimately, Zack Snyder, known for his visually stylized comic adaptations, 300, Watchmen, was hired in October 2010. Snyder's wife and producing partner Deborah Snyder joined the team, alongside Nolan and his collaborator Emma Thomas, giving Man of Steel a mix of Snyder's style and Nolan's grounded sensibilities. DC Entertainment and Legendary Pictures co-financed the film with Warner Bros., with a hefty production budget reported between $225 to $258 million. Legendary's involvement continued its partnership with Warner on DC films. Veteran Superman producer Jon Peters retained an executive producer credit, but he had no active role. With financing secured and a director on board, Man of Steel moved briskly toward filming to meet the legal deadline. David S. Goyer's script, developed from his story with Nolan, set out to modernize Superman's origin. It employed a non-linear narrative, using Clark Kent's childhood flashbacks to build emotional depth. The story emphasized Clark's alien nature and humanity's response to first contact, aligning with Nolan's philosophy that the film should feel as if Superman existed as the only superhero in a realistic world. The villain, General Zod, was chosen not simply because he was a fan favorite, but because Goyer and Nolan felt Zod's goals fit naturally with the themes of the story they wanted to tell. As Goyer explained, they began with what kind of story and theme they wanted. In this case, exploring identity, free will versus destiny, and an alien's place in our world. The choice of Zod and his fellow Kryptonians as antagonists became obvious. Christopher Nolan, mentoring the project, admired Bryan Singer's reverence for Richard Donner's Superman, but was determined that Man of Steel would forge its own path. This meant no John Williams theme music, no narrative ties to earlier films, and a more serious tone. Hans Zimmer was commissioned to compose an all-new score. The screenplay was reportedly one of the most challenging of Goyer's career, having to balance epic action with intimate drama and differentiate Superman's arc from previous versions. Principal photography rolled under the codename Autumn Frost on August 1st, 2011, giving the production a tight window to hit the 2013 release. Zack Snyder chose to shoot on 35mm film rather than digital, believing it would lend a grand cinematic texture. Filming took place in multiple locations reflecting Clark Kent's journey. Key sites included rural Plano, Illinois for Smallville, Kansas, the Chicago Loop for Metropolis, and stages in Vancouver and Burnaby, Canada, where Krypton and spaceship interiors were built. Snyder was initially reluctant to use native 3D cameras due to their cumbersome nature, so Man of Steel was filmed in 2D and later converted to 3D in post-production. The production stretched into early 2012. Actor Michael Shannon noted filming continued up until February 2012. The shoot involved large-scale action set pieces, from a Smallville brawl to the climactic Metropolis battle, with practical effects and CGI. Unlike Snyder's earlier green screen heavy films, Man of Steel made notable use of real locations and sets. The director wanted a tangible, almost documentary-like realism, despite the fantastical subject. Cinematographer Amir Mokri employed handheld camera techniques during action scenes. Even wild visual effects sequences like Superman and Zod flying through buildings have an on-the-ground, you-are-there feeling. This approach was inspired in part by the visceral style of Battlestar Galactica's space battles, with the VFX team ensuring even CGI camera movements felt like a physical camera operator could have captured them. By the end of shooting, Snyder had an ambitious reimagining of Superman's world, blending Midwestern Americana, high-tech alien design, and explosive superhero action. Snyder and the team wanted an updated aesthetic that made sense within the story's universe. The iconic costume was tweaked to appear more alien and armor-like, dropping the traditional red trunks for a sleeker look. Early on, filmmakers attempted to include the red outer underwear as a nod to the classic suit, but they could not design one that fit into the tone of the film, so the trunks were ultimately omitted. Costume designers James Acheson and Michael Wilkinson gave the suit a textured chainmail appearance with Kryptonian glyphs, explaining that on Krypton, everyone wears a version of this attire with their family crests, Kal-El's shield being the El family symbol for hope. This world-building detail grounded Superman's suit in the film's logic rather than as an arbitrary costume choice. Similarly, General Zod's intimidating black armor was created digitally. Rather than encumber actor Michael Shannon with a heavy practical suit, Weta Digital rendered Zod's battle armor with CGI in order to give Shannon full freedom of movement. The visual effects workload was enormous, shared by major FX houses like Weta Digital, MPC, and Double Negative. From the alien vistas of Krypton, complete with exotic creatures and fluid, liquid geometry displays used for Kryptonian technology, to the citywide destruction in the finale, the VFX team strove to make the fantastical elements feel as natural as possible. Snyder insisted the extraordinary be depicted with internal realism. For instance, how the camera might shake or struggle to track a supersonic flying figure. By June 2013, Man of Steel was ready to premiere, and it did so with great fanfare at Alice Tully Hall in New York on June 10th, ahead of its wide release on June 14th, 2020. Actor Michael Shannon noted filming continued up until February 2012. The shoot involved large-scale action set pieces, many of which were done with a blend of practical effects. Unlike Snyder's earlier green screen heavy films, Man of Steel made notable use of real locations and sets. The director wanted a tangible, documentary-like realism to the visuals, despite the fantastical subject. Cinematographer Amir Mokri employed handheld camera techniques during action scenes, so that even wild visual effects sequences, like Superman and Zod flying through buildings, an on-the-ground you-are-there feeling. This approach was inspired in part by the visceral style of Battlestar Galactica's space battles, with the VFX team ensuring that even CGI camera movements felt like a physical camera operator could have captured them. By the end of shooting, Snyder had captured an ambitious reimagining of Superman's world, blending Midwestern Americana, high-tech alien design, and explosive superhero action. In redesigning Superman's look, Snyder and the team wanted an updated aesthetic within the story's universe. The iconic costume was tweaked to appear more alien and armor-like, dropping the traditional red trunks for a sleeker look. Early on, filmmakers attempted to include the red outer underwear as a nod to the classic suit, but they could not design one that fit into the tone of the film, so the trunks were ultimately omitted. Costume designers James Acheson and Michael Wilkinson gave the suit a textured chainmail appearance with Kryptonian glyphs, explaining on Krypton, everyone wears this attire with their family crests, Kal-El's S shield being the L family symbol for hope. This detail grounded Superman's suit in the film's logic, rather than as an arbitrary costume choice. Similarly, General Zod's intimidating black armor was created digitally. Rather than encumber actor Michael Shannon with a heavy practical suit, Weta Digital rendered Zod's battle armor with CGI in order to give Shannon full freedom of movement. The visual effects workload was enormous, shared by major FX houses like Weta Digital, MPC, and Double Negative. From the alien vistas of Krypton to citywide destruction, the VFX team strove to make the fantastical elements feel as natural as possible. Snyder insisted the extraordinary be depicted with internal realism. For instance, how the camera might shake or struggle to track a supersonic flying figure to help audiences suspend disbelief. By June 2013, Man of Steel was ready to premiere at Alice Tully Hall in New York on June 10, 2000, ahead of its wide release on June 14, 2000. One of the most critical aspects was casting new faces to embody Superman and his famous supporting characters. Snyder and producers conducted an extensive search to find actors who could honor the essence of these icons while fitting the film's more realistic. British actor Henry Cavill won the role of Superman, becoming the first non-American actor to officially portray Superman on film. Henry Cavill was hardly an unknown. He had been a finalist for the part in earlier Superman projects. In fact, Henry Cavill was once cast as Superman in a mid-2000s reboot attempt, Superman Flyby, that never got off the ground, and he was a leading contender for Bryan Singer's Superman Returns before that role went to Brandon Routh. For Man of Steel, Snyder auditioned multiple actors in the classic Superman outfit from the Christopher Reeve era, since the new suit had not yet been made. Henry Cavill's combination of physical presence and earnestness impressed Snyder. The director recalls that many actors look ridiculous in Superman's costume, but when Cavill donned Reeve's old suit, he exuded this kind of crazy calm confidence that convinced Snyder and the studio that this was their Superman. Cavill committed himself fully to the role, undergoing a rigorous training regimen. He reportedly consumed 5,000 calories a day and trained over 2 hours daily to pack on muscle mass and achieve Superman's physique. On the acting side, Cavill immersed himself in Superman lore. He drew inspiration from key comic storylines, including The Death of Superman, The Return of Superman, Red Sun, and Superman Batman: The Search for Kryptonite, aiming to channel elements from the source material into his portrayal. Cavill noted that his Clark is a man struggling with isolation and identity. He's alone and trying to find out what makes sense. Where's your baseline? Where do you draw a limit with the power you have? This introspective take resonated with Snyder's vision of a more vulnerable, soul-searching Superman. It's interesting to note that Cavill very nearly missed out due to scheduling. One of Snyder's early top choices, actor Joe Manganiello, was unavailable due to True Blood commitments, clearing the path for Cavill. Manganiello would later join the DC universe as Deathstroke in a brief Justice League cameo. Other actors like Matthew Goode, Armie Hammer, and future TV Superman Tyler Hoechlin were also rumored to have been on the consideration list, underscoring the exhaustive search. In the end, Cavill's casting was announced in January 2011, and he would define the role for a new generation. For the key role of intrepid Daily Planet reporter Lois Lane, the filmmakers sought an actress who could bring intelligence, toughness, and warmth. After many auditions, three-time Academy Award nominee Amy Adams was chosen. Adams had actually pursued the part of Lois before. She auditioned for the role in prior Superman films, Superman Flyby and Superman Returns, but had not been cast. This time, her persistence paid off. Adams was selected from a shortlist that included Kristen Stewart, Zoe Saldana, Olivia Wilde, and Mila Kunis. Zack Snyder said after meeting Adams, he felt she was perfect for Lois and had all the qualities Lois needed. In March 2011, Adams's casting was officially announced, with Snyder calling her one of the most versatile and respected actresses in films, praising her ability to capture Lois's smart, funny, tough, and ambitious nature. Amy Adams approached Lois as a modern woman and seasoned journalist. She described this incarnation of Lois Lane as an independent, feisty woman in a more realistic world than past portrayals. Lois's profession was updated in light of the changing media landscape. She's a Pulitzer-winning reporter who's not afraid to embed herself in dangerous situations. Adams noted the newspaper business has changed, and her Lois is a hands-on investigative reporter in the field. In Man of Steel, Lois is instrumental to the plot, tracking down Clark in Smallville and later helping defeat Zod. Adams's casting added credibility to the character's importance. The chemistry between Adams and Cavill was also a factor. Their screen test demonstrated a nice balance, with Adams bringing out a lighter, human side of Cavill's Superman amid the film's events. Amy Adams approached Lois as a modern woman and journalist. She described this incarnation of Lois Lane as an independent, feisty woman in a more realistic world than past portrayals. Lois's profession was updated in light of the changing media landscape. She's a Pulitzer-winning reporter who's not afraid to embed herself in dangerous situations. Adams noted the newspaper business has changed, and her Lois is a hands-on investigative reporter. In Man of Steel, Lois is instrumental to the plot, tracking down Clark in Smallville and helping defeat Zod. Adams' casting added credibility to the character's importance. The chemistry between Adams and Cavill was also a factor. Their screen test demonstrated a nice balance, with Adams bringing out a lighter, human side of Cavill's Superman amid the film's intense events. Casting General Zod. Superman's nemesis in Man of Steel is General Zod, the exiled Kryptonian general bent on terraforming Earth. To portray Zod, Snyder cast Michael Shannon, an actor renowned for his intense chameleon-like performances. Shannon, an Oscar nominee, was not the only name considered. Early on, actors Viggo Mortensen and Daniel Day-Lewis were floated as possibilities. Shannon's audition won out, and Snyder felt that Shannon could project both the intelligence and the malice, making him perfect for the role. Shannon brought a coiled ferocity to Zod, but also a depth that made the character's fanatical motives understandable. Zod genuinely believes he is acting for the survival of his people. Shannon had to adapt to unusual filming conditions. Zod's imposing armor was entirely CGI, meaning Shannon performed in a motion capture suit on set rather than a real costume. This allowed him to move freely and fight in ways a suit would have inhibited, but it required trusting the visual effects team to paint on his look later. Despite technical challenges, Shannon's performance, especially in confrontations with Superman, earned strong notices for its menace. Goyer said, once they decided on a story about Clark confronting his heritage, and the possibility of other surviving Kryptonians, the only villain we could have used was Zod and the Kryptonians. Zod provided a direct mirror to Kal-El, both products of Krypton, but with opposing values. Shannon embraced that dynamic, even as Zod screams lines like, "I will find him." With operatic fury, he grounds the character's rage in a soldier's sense of loss and purpose, elements Snyder knew Shannon could convey. In preparation, Shannon had to adapt to unusual filming conditions. Zod's imposing armor was entirely CGI, meaning Shannon performed in a motion capture suit rather than a real costume. This allowed him to move freely and fight in ways a heavy suit would have inhibited, but it also required trusting the visual effects team to paint on his intimidating look later. Shannon's performance in climactic confrontations with Superman earned strong notices for its menace. Explaining the choice of Zod from a story perspective, Goyer said that once they decided on a story about Clark confronting his heritage and other surviving Kryptonians, the only villain was Zod. Zod provided a direct mirror to Kal-El. Both are products of Krypton, but with opposing values. Shannon embraced that dynamic. Even as Zod screams lines like, "I will find him," he grounds the character's rage in a soldier's sense of loss and purpose, elements Snyder knew Shannon could convey. Supporting cast highlights. The cast was rounded out with a blend of veteran stars and rising talent. Academy Award winner Russell Crowe was cast as Jor-El, Superman's biological father on Krypton. Crowe lent gravitas to the role, following in Marlon Brando's footsteps from 1978's Superman. Notably, Sean Penn and Clive Owen were also considered for Jor-El before Crowe accepted the part. Crowe drew upon his experience as a father when reading Jor-El's lines, bringing emotional weight to Jor-El's decision to send his infant son to Earth. Kevin Costner and Diane Lane played Clark's adoptive parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent. Lane was the first actor cast after Cavill, underscoring how vital Martha Kent was seen. Finding the right Martha was important because she represents values that shape Superman. He praised Diane Lane's ability to convey the wisdom and wonder of a mother to a superpowered son. Snyder cast Costner to embody the sturdy Costner and Lane together, signaled the film's tone. Those guys are serious actors, and we're taking this movie very seriously. The presence of respected actors indicated the filmmaker's commitment to emotional realism. Costner had initial misgivings when he first read the script, possibly reacting to Jonathan Kent's ambiguous moral guidance, but he embraced the part, delivering a memorable portrayal of Clark's father. Lawrence Fishburne was cast as Perry White, editor of the Daily Planet. In a bit of inspired, non-traditional casting, Fishburne became the first African-American actor to play Perry White on screen. He approached Perry by channeling the late CBS newsman Ed Bradley as an inspiration for the character's authority and integrity. Additionally, German actress Antje Traue was cast as Faora, Zod's ruthless lieutenant. Fun fact, Gal Gadot auditioned for Faora and was offered the role but had to decline because of a pregnancy, freeing her up to be cast as Wonder Woman in the sequel, with Traue on board and other roles filled by the likes of Ayelet Zurer as Lara Lorvan, Kal-El's mother, and Christopher Maloney and Harry Lennox as U.S. military officers. Man of Steel assembled a strong ensemble to support Cavill's Superman. Each casting choice reflected Snyder's emphasis on grounding the fantastical premise with credible performers who could sell the drama. Behind the scenes, Man of Steel had its share of challenges, from the pressures of rebooting an icon to the practical difficulties of staging superhuman action. Creative debates. One creative dispute arose over the film's climactic moment. In the original script, generals sucked back into the Phantom Zone, surviving to potentially return. Zack Snyder and David Goyer felt this was unsatisfying, lacking emotional resolution. They proposed a controversial change. Superman would kill Zod to save innocent lives. This idea ran counter to the long-standing portrayal of Superman as a hero who does not kill. Producer Christopher Nolan initially opposed it, but Goyer devised a scenario, Zod using heat vision to threaten a trapped family, leaving Superman no choice, that convinced Nolan the act would be depicted as a last resort. With Nolan's reluctant blessing, the team went ahead with the risky ending. This debate highlights the filmmaker's willingness to challenge traditional Superman tropes in service of the story's stakes. It was a bold, creative gamble that would later spark intense audience discussion. Many fans praised the realism of showing Superman make an impossible choice, while others criticized it as betraying the character's ideals. In Nolan's view, if Superman had to kill, the story needed to earn that moment, and Snyder's team worked carefully to do so. Another challenge was merging Snyder's style with Nolan's sensibilities. Nolan advocated for a grounded, quasi-scientific approach to Superman's mythology, treating Kal-El's presence as an alien first contact event. Snyder, known for highly stylized visuals, had to adjust. The solution was to lean into realism wherever possible. For example, Snyder's team developed Kryptonian technology with a functional logic, hiring linguists to create a written Kryptonian language. They shot many scenes on real locations to capture natural lighting and environment. Snyder dialed back some of his trademark flourishes. Man of Steel employs a lot of handheld camera work and quick, visceral action shots to feel immediate and true to life. These decisions were deliberate responses to Nolan's "make it plausible" mantra, an evolving process during production. Filming. entailed complex action sequences that were physically demanding. Henry Cavill performed many stunts and often wore an uncomfortable skin-tight suit for long hours. One interesting anecdote illustrates Cavill's commitment to character detail. For an early scene where Superman, as Clark, saves workers on a burning oil rig, the filmmakers suggested Cavill shave his chest, thinking it would look more aesthetically heroic in the shirtless scene. Cavill refused, citing the death of Superman comics, where a resurrected Superman is depicted with a hairy chest. In Cavill's view, Superman should have chest hair as part of his image. The team relented, and indeed Cavill's look in the film stayed true to that detail. While minor, it shows the thought given to small aspects of portrayal. Staging the epic fight sequences was another challenge. The Smallville battle between the two Kryptonians, Superman versus Faora and Namek, was filmed on location in Plano, Illinois, meaning the crew took over a small town and had to rig extensive wire work, explosives, and pyrotechnics on real streets. Balancing practical effects with CGI high jumps and mid-air punches would be wire stunt work then enhanced to show smashing through buildings or moving at super speed. In downtown Chicago, the production had to capture plates for the Metropolis destruction while minimizing disruption to the city. They opted to film many establishing shots in Chicago and combine them with VFX cityscapes and backlot sets for controlled explosions. Even with meticulous planning, the sheer scale of simulated destruction, building collapses, fiery debris, was an ambitious undertaking. Snyder's choice to shoot on film meant limited takes for complex scenes. Michael Shannon found acting in a motion capture suit liberating in terms of movement, but strange. He had to imagine the armor and cape his character would have in the final cut. Co-star Angie Trau Faora likewise trained intensively to perform fight choreography that would be augmented to Kryptonian power levels. Mid-production adjustments. While Man of Steel did not undergo any widely reported last-minute rewrites or reshoots on the scale of some superhero films, there were small changes. One cut scene, for example, involved baby Clark, Kal-El on Krypton. Zack Snyder shot a moment of Jor-El observing his infant son, perhaps to emphasize Krypton's biotechnological birthing processes, but it was cut for disrupting pacing. A brief segment where Jor-El speaks in Kryptonian was filmed but removed, as the alien tongue might have been off-putting without subtitles. These deletions were to keep the narrative focused. The marketing department influenced a creative tweak. In trailers, Clark is shown wearing a red cape, evocative of the classic Superman persona, used to tug nostalgic heartstrings in marketing, though in the film it's a quick flash. Snyder enjoyed uncommon support from Warner Brothers during production. With Nolan's clout, studio interference was reportedly minimal. The main challenge was ensuring Man of Steel could serve as a launchpad for a DC cinematic universe. Warner Brothers requested and got little Easter eggs hinting at a larger world, e.g. a Wayne Enterprises logo on a satellite that Zod destroys, and a LexCorp logo on a building in Metropolis, which Snyder included. There were discussions early on about tying Man of Steel into Nolan's Dark Knight universe, having Christian Bale's Batman exist in this world, but Nolan and Snyder agreed to keep them separate. Another challenge was merging Snyder's style with Nolan's sensibilities. Nolan, as producer, advocated for a grounded, quasi-scientific approach to Superman's mythology, treating Kal-El's presence as an alien first contact event. Snyder, known for stylized visuals, had to adjust. The solution lean into realism. Snyder's team developed Kryptonian technology with a functional logic, hiring linguists to create a written Kryptonian language. They shot many scenes on real locations, rather than green screens to capture natural lighting and environment. Snyder dialed back some trademark flourishes like slow motion. Man of Steel employs handheld camera work and quick visceral action shots to feel immediate and true to life. These were deliberate responses to Nolan's "make it plausible" mantra, and implementing them was an evolving process during production. Physical production hurdles. Filming. Man of Steel entailed complex action sequences, physically demanding for the cast and crew. Henry Cavill performed many stunts and wore an uncomfortable skin-tight suit for long hours. One interesting anecdote illustrates Cavill's commitment to character detail. For an early scene where Superman, as Clark, saves workers on a burning oil rig, the filmmakers suggested Cavill shave his chest, thinking it would look more aesthetically heroic in the shirtless scene. Cavill refused, citing the Death of Superman comics, where a resurrected Superman is depicted with a hairy chest. Superman should have chest hair as part of his image. The team relented, and indeed Cavill's look in the film stayed true to that detail. While minor, it shows the level of thought given to portrayal. Staging the fight sequences was another challenge. The Smallville battle between the Kryptonians was filmed on location in Plano, Illinois. The crew took over a small town and had to rig wirework, explosives, and pyrotechnics on real streets. Balancing practical effects with CGI required careful coordination. For instance, high jumps and mid-air punches would be wire stunt work for the actors, then enhanced later to show smashing through buildings or moving at super speed. In downtown Chicago, the production had to capture plates for the Metropolis destruction while minimizing disruption to the city. They opted to film many establishing shots in Chicago and combine them with VFX cityscapes and backlot sets for controlled explosions. Even with meticulous planning, the sheer scale of simulated destruction, building collapses, fiery debris, was an ambitious undertaking. Snyder's choice to shoot on film meant limited takes for complex scenes, adding pressure to get things right. Snyder enjoyed uncommon support from Warner Brothers during production. With Nolan's clout, studio interference was minimal. The main challenge was ensuring Man of Steel could serve as a launchpad for a DC cinematic universe. Warner Brothers requested, and got, little Easter eggs, hinting at a larger world, e.g. a Wayne Enterprises logo on a satellite that Zod destroys, and a LexCorp logo on a building in Metropolis, which Snyder happily included. There were even discussions early on about tying Man of Steel into Nolan's Dark Knight universe, having Christian Bale's Batman exist in this world, but Nolan and Snyder agreed to keep them separate to preserve each story's integrity. Bringing Man of Steel to life involved resolving creative differences, technical hurdles in filming action, and iterative changes to hone the tone and pace. Despite the film wrapped on time and on budget, setting the stage for its anticipated release. Zack Snyder's Man of Steel informed by past Superman films and the rich mythology of the comics, even as it strove to distinguish itself with a contemporary tone. Departures and homages, the shadow of Richard Donner's Superman 1978 and its sequels loomed over any new Superman movie. Man of Steel intentionally set out to be a departure from Donner's bright, optimistic style and from Bryan Singer's Superman Returns, which had been a direct homage to Donner's vision. Producer Christopher Nolan noted that many had approached Superman in different ways, and while he respected Donner's and Singer's interpretations, he was committed to a new approach that treated Superman in a self-contained, realistic context. Thus, Man of Steel lacks familiar elements of earlier films. John Williams' iconic theme is replaced by Hans Zimmer's new score. Lex Luthor is nowhere to be seen, aside from a LexCorp logo Easter egg, and the humor and romance of the Reeve era give way to a more somber, introspective mood. Even the traditional tropes, like Clark's secret identity via glasses, are underplayed. Clark doesn't don his signature glasses until the final moments of the film, a fact perhaps influenced by Snyder's admission that the glasses disguise can come off as a bit ridiculous in a modern setting. That said, Man of Steel does pay homage to the Superman legacy in subtler ways. Casting Henry Cavill in Christopher Reeve's classic suit for his screen test symbolized a passing of the torch. The title at Man of Steel is a nod to one of Superman's nicknames, and was originally the working title for a shelved Superman sequel, now repurposed for the reboot. There are also visual homages. Young Clark Kent, playing with a red cape, recalls Donner's film. An early scene of adult Clark hitchhiking echoes similar Wanderer scenes in Superman 2, 1980. but Snyder often subverts expectations. For instance, whereas Donner's Superman saves a cat from a tree, Snyder's young Clark is overwhelmed by his powers in a classroom, a much more fraught scenario. One previous film that influenced Man of Steel was Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, 2005. Warner Bros. Wanted Man of Steel to do for Superman what Batman Begins did for Batman: reboot the character with a serious tone and grounded origin, paving the way for a larger universe. This influence is evident in the non-linear storytelling that drops us into Clark's adult journey and later reveals his formative moments, much like Batman Begins used flashbacks. Additionally, Man of Steel shares Batman Begins' interest in the hero's psychological struggles and realistic societal reactions to a masked hero. There's a touch of Batman Begins in the way Man of Steel treats its villain. Zod, like Ra's al Ghul, is presented with understandable motives, survival of his civilization, even as he commits heinous acts. A nuanced approach reminiscent of Nolan's style. Comic book inspirations. While Man of Steel is not a direct adaptation of any single comic storyline, it draws inspiration from several famous Superman comics. Writer David Goyer consulted seminal Superman works as he crafted the story. One acknowledged influence is John Byrne's The Man of Steel, 1986 miniseries, which was a 1980s reboot of Superman's origin in the comics. Burns' take similarly made Clark's Kansas upbringing and Kryptonian heritage central to his identity, themes mirrored in the film. Another major influence is Mark Waid's Superman, Birthright, 2003, an updated origin. In Birthright, Clark travels the world trying to find his purpose, even working undercover as a foreign journalist. This strongly resembles Cavill's Clark drifting through odd jobs, fishing boat, bar busboy, etc., and secretly performing heroic deeds in the film's first act. Birthright introduced the idea that the S symbol means hope in Krypton's language, used in the movie's dialogue. Mark Waid himself recognized elements of Birthright in the film, although he was an outspoken critic of the film's darker aspects. Zack Snyder has mentioned Superman, Earth 1, 2010, as another work with a similar approach. The visual of a battered Superman screaming as he exerts himself to the limit could have leapt off the pages of The Death of Superman. Moreover, as noted earlier, Cavill even insisted on keeping Superman's chest hair consistent with how the character in the Death of Superman series. A minutiae, but telling of his devotion to comic accuracy. Man of Steel does pay homage to the Superman legacy in subtler ways. Casting Henry Cavill in Christopher Reeve's classic suit for his screen test was an homage that also symbolized a passing of the torch. The film's title, Man of Steel, is a nod to one of Superman's well-known nicknames, and was originally the working title for a shelved Superman sequel. There are also visual homages. Young Clark Kent playing with a red cape recalls the imagery of the young Clark in Donner's film lifting Pa Kent's truck, and an early scene of adult Clark hitchhiking echoes Wanderer scenes in Superman 2. Man of Steel borrows the idea of a Kryptonian genetic codex and a civil war, which have echoes in various comic arcs, like John Byrne's World of Krypton and more recent stories involving Kryptonian clones or genetic engineering. The film's introduction, showing a technologically advanced Krypton on the brink of collapse, is reminiscent of Krypton's portrayal in Byrne's reboot and later comics, which often emphasize a more sci-fi, less idyllic Krypton. Snyder's Krypton is filled with flying alien creatures, armor-clad warriors, and organic spacecraft, a far cry from Donner's serene crystal planet. This shift was partly to differentiate from Donner's version and partly inspired by modern comic art depictions of Krypton. The villain Faora in the film, a formidable female Kryptonian, is inspired by Superman's foes, Ursa from Superman 2, and Faora from the comics. The climactic tactic Zod employs, terraforming Earth into a new Krypton, is somewhat akin to the plot of Superman, Earth 1, where surviving Kryptonians attempt to remake Earth. Snyder's action scenes drew inspiration outside of comics. The high-speed fights have been compared to Japanese anime, specifically Dragon Ball Z, with Superman and foes flying at supersonic speeds and striking with explosive force. In fact, storyboard artist Jay Oliva, who worked with Snyder on the film, explicitly cited anime as an influence on action that Western live-action cinema hadn't seen before. Man of Steel's battles feel different from the more restrained confrontations in earlier Superman movies. Snyder wanted to finally showcase Superman's power unleashed, which previous films, due to older effects technology or directorial choice, had never fully realized on screen. Thematic influences. The story and themes also connect to broader cultural and mythic touchstones. Snyder amplified Superman as a Christ-like figure, a theme present in Donner's 1978 film. In Man of Steel, Clark is 33 years old during Zod's invasion, paralleling the age of Christ at crucifixion, and there are numerous religious allegories noted by commentators, from Clark consulting a priest to Superman floating in space with arms outstretched. Warner Brothers created outreach materials for Christian groups, highlighting Superman's self-sacrifice parallels to Jesus. The decision to present Superman as an alien first and a superhero second was influenced by science fiction and first contact narratives. What if an alien with godlike powers lived among us? This framing owes as much to classic sci-fi, The Day the Earth Stood Still, as it does to any Superman comic. It allowed the film to explore fear and trust issues. Characters in Man of Steel debate surrendering Kal-El to Zod, and the military is initially hostile towards Superman. In June 2013, Man of Steel became one of the most talked about films of the year, provoking a wide range of reactions. It performed solidly at the box office and launched the new DC Extended Universe, but it also generated debate among fans and critics regarding its tone and interpretation of Superman. Man of Steel opened strong and went on to gross $291 million in the United States and Canada and $379 million overseas, for a worldwide total of $670 million. This made it the highest-grossing Superman film ever at that time, unadjusted for inflation. It was among the top 10 worldwide earners of 2013. The film set a June opening weekend record with over $116 million domestically in its first weekend, including Thursday night screenings. It also held well in markets like China, where Superman was being introduced to a new generation. Despite controversy over its darker approach, Man of Steel proved the commercial viability of a Superman reboot. The success led Warner Brothers to fast-track a follow-up, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, released in 2016. Man of Steel's box office, while robust, did not reach some Marvel entries of the time. Warner Brothers reportedly had hoped for an even bigger haul given Superman's iconic status, but nonetheless, the film was profitable. Deadline Hollywood calculated its net profit around $42.7 million after all expenses. The movie benefited from product placement and promotional partnerships, over $160 million worth of tie-in marketing deals with brands from toys to fast food, helped offset advertising costs. From a financial standpoint, Man of Steel successfully relaunched DC's flagship hero and laid the foundation for the DC Extended Universe. Critical response. Critical reaction to Man of Steel was mixed, reflecting a deep division in how people felt about the film's tone and choices. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds about a 56–57% approval rating with an average score around 6.2/10. The Rotten Tomatoes critics' consensus described the movie thus: Man of Steel's action and spectacle can't fully overcome its detours into generic blockbuster territory. In other words, most critics acknowledged the impressive visuals and grand scale, but many found the film lacking in areas like character development and freshness. Metacritic assigned a score of 55, indicating mixed reviews. On the positive side, Man of Steel had strong defenders. Many audience members and critics praised the fresh energy and spectacle it brought to Superman. The film earned an A cinema score from opening night audiences, and straight A grades from the under 18 and over 50 demographics. Man of Steel engendered passionate discourse, which arguably has kept it relevant in pop culture conversations. Years later, it's a film people debate the right way to portray Superman. In summary, Man of Steel succeeded at reinvigorating Superman's box office might and won a devoted fan following, evidenced by high home video sales and inclusion in some fan rankings of top superhero films. But it also left a portion of the audience divided. The realistic violence, melancholy tone, and departure from the Boy Scout image of Superman were praised by those craving something new and criticized by those who view Superman as an inherently hopeful figure. This dichotomy in reception would shape Warner Bros. And Zack Snyder's subsequent DC films as they responded to both accolades and critiques. Fan reaction to Man of Steel was intense and polarizing. The film cultivated a passionate fan base who appreciated the mature take on Superman. These fans often cite scenes like Clark learning to fly set to Zimmer's score as moments of genuine inspiration and awe. Many welcomed the film's gravitas, arguing Superman, often seen as overpowered or old-fashioned, finally felt relevant. Online communities rallied around Snyder's vision, and Man of Steel consistently finds its name in debates ranking modern superhero outings. On the other hand, longtime Superman devotees who grew up with Reeves' incarnation sometimes recoiled at the perceived cynicism or excessive destruction. The image of Superman and Zod leveling a city with little depiction of Superman saving civilians was a sticking point. It even helped inspire the plot of the sequel, Batman v Superman, which directly addresses the collateral damage. The infamous neck snap of Zod became a cultural moment. Some fans defended it as showing Superman's anguish and resolve, and pointed out even the Reeves Superman killed Zod in his own way in Superman 2's extended cut, whereas others made it a meme or shorthand for the film's departure from Superman's no-kill rule. Interestingly, in the years since release, Man of Steel's reputation among some fans has grown. The film is often reappraised in light of subsequent DC films. Some who were lukewarm initially found a new appreciation for Man of Steel after seeing the full arc of Snyder's trilogy: Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Zack Snyder's Justice League. The movie's legacy is that it dared to ask, what would happen if Superman appeared today? And in doing so, it opened a conversation that continues to animate discussions about the character's future on film. Snyder's key to making Superman relatable was to give him problems and uncertainties despite his godlike powers. Snyder explained in a 2023 interview, "Superman can do anything and has no real challenges, which can make him hard to identify with." Snyder's Man of Steel loads Clark with dilemmas and doubts. Young Clark is burdened by powers he can't control, leading to anxiety and isolation. Adult Clark is torn between the moral guidance of two fathers. Jor-El urges him to be a savior, while Jonathan fears the world will reject him. Clark must debate whether to reveal himself to humanity at the risk of causing panic, and ultimately faces a gut-wrenching moral choice in how to stop Zod. These are problems crafted to humanize a near-invincible character. Snyder aimed for audiences to see Superman not as an infallible demigod, but as a man trying to figure out his place, having to grapple with his own humanity, as Snyder put it. This emphasis on internal conflict and what it means to be human is a core of Snyder's vision. It's why the film spends substantial time on Clark's wanderings and flashbacks, and the victory over Zod is portrayed with anguish rather than triumphalism. Snyder wanted the audience to feel the weight of Superman's role. Snyder's Man of Steel marked a departure from the ultra-stylized, hyper-saturated look of some of his earlier works. He opted for a muted color palette. Krypton has a gray, rugged beauty. Smallville scenes are shot with a warm, sun-bleached Americana tone. Metropolis is depicted with a cool blue steel hue. The desaturated look was a deliberate move to differentiate from the candy-colored world of the 1978 Superman and align with Nolan's Batman. Snyder employed a handheld camera and natural lens flares to impart immediacy and authenticity even in scenes of aliens and flying men. Fight sequences, extravagant in destruction, are often shot from a human perspective, e.g., a bystander's viewpoint during the Smallville fight until the camera swings to follow Superman. This was meant to mimic how a witness might actually perceive these godlike beings clashing, adding to the "you are there" feeling Snyder wanted. Snyder's trademark striking imagery remains. He frames Superman in mythic poses, rising out of a capsule with sunlight floating among skulls, descending gently with Lois in his arms. Each of these visuals reinforces the idea of Superman as a figure of myth and legend, more than just a standard superhero. Even the decision to shoot on film was part of Snyder's stylistic. He felt film would lend the story an epic, timeless quality. Snyder didn't shy away from visual symbolism. The film is laden with thematics. Clark in church with a stained glass Jesus behind him when he's contemplating sacrifice. Zod's forces literally crucifying Superman in a dream sequence to tempt him. The repeated motif of Clark extending a helping hand to a school bus to Lois, symbolizing hope. Snyder has a painterly eye, and Man of Steel often pauses for wordless moments where visuals carry emotion, such as young Clark with a red cape, or Superman taking flight for the first time with pure joy. By the end, Superman telling the military, "I'm here to help, on my terms." And assuming the mild-mannered Clark Kent persona at the Daily Planet, both acts of self-definition. He's choosing how to integrate into our world. Collaboration with Nolan Goyer. It's important to note that Snyder didn't create this vision alone. It was a collaboration with Christopher Nolan and David Goyer, who provided the initial story. Nolan's influence instilled a no-jokes policy to avoid camp, and Goyer's influence brought in the rich comic lore and realistic dialogue beats. Snyder, coming from a more visual background, fused those elements with his distinct style. All three were intent on one main goal: reintroduce Superman in a way we haven't seen before. Nolan said Goyer's pitch was the first time he truly conceived how Superman could work in a modern context, and Snyder executed that by updating the aesthetics and emotional pitch accordingly. In conclusion, Zack Snyder's vision for Man of Steel was to treat Superman not as a quaint relic, but as a complex figure in a complex world. To answer the question, who is Superman to us today? He envisioned a Superman who could inspire hope after overcoming fear and doubt within himself and those around him. Snyder enveloped this vision in a grand operatic style with cutting-edge visuals and a somber philosophical tone. While this approach was not without controversy, it undeniably succeeded in sparking new interest and discourse around Superman. Snyder's Man of Steel presented Kal-El as Krypton's last son and Earth's newest hero in a way that hadn't been seen before, as a figure who has to earn the title through hardship and soul-searching. Reimagined for the 21st century, grounded yet mythic, burdened yet still inspiring, a hero who, by the film's end, genuinely feels like he could be our contemporary man of tomorrow.